Facebook's leadership open-sourced their AI models in 2024, handing China's tech firms a shortcut. Careless People by Sarah Wynn-Williams. Audiobook summary and review by StoryShots. A pregnant woman negotiates with foreign military officials. She sends emails between contractions. That is not a metaphor. It actually happened to Sarah Wynn-Williams. She spent 7 years inside Facebook's top ranks. Her memoir, Careless People, turns personal humiliation into a map of how unchecked power really works. This summary covers 8 key ideas that will change how you think about tech, power, and the people who run both. Who is this for? This book is for anyone who has wondered what really happens behind the glass walls of a company that claims to change the world for the better. It is sharp reading for people who work inside large organizations and sense that the values on the wall do not match the choices made in private. If you have ever been told to advocate for yourself while watching leadership dodge every hard call, Careless People will feel uncomfortably familiar. About the author. Sarah Wynn-Williams trained as a lawyer and diplomat in New Zealand. In 2011, she pitched herself into a policy job at Facebook and rose to Director of Global Public Policy. She worked closely with Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg for 6 years, giving her a view most critics of big tech never get. Unlike a policy report, this is a memoir built from lived detail, strange anecdotes, and personal wreckage. The myth of the well-meaning startup. Most people picture Facebook's early years as scrappy but harmless, a dorm room project that grew up too fast. The real story looks different. The scrappiness was real. Employees worked past midnight and started again before dawn. Everyone was expected to give everything, not because anyone forced them, but because the company sold itself as a mission, not a job. New hires got handed a booklet of company values on day 1, the kind of document meant to signal purpose. That mission framing did something specific underneath the surface. It made questioning leadership feel like betraying the cause. Warning signs got waved away for years, not months, because nobody wanted to be the person who broke the spell. The chaos of the early culture was not a phase that recklessness grew out of. It was the seed recklessness grew from. If your workplace treats overwork as devotion, you are watching the same seed get planted. Startups do not outgrow careless habits. They scale them. The Autocracy of One. The official pitch was collaboration. A flat hierarchy where everyone builds the future together. The actual machine ran differently. Every hard call eventually landed on one desk, and it got decided on a whim rather than through any real process. Executives around that desk did not check the power. They packaged it and carried it out. This tells you the shape of the structure. It does not yet tell you the psychology behind it. It does not explain what happens when the person at the top never has to face the people his choices hurt. One man's mood became company policy more often than anyone wants to admit. That gap between structure and psychology is exactly where the story turns darker. The China Playbook nobody voted on. Facebook wanted into the Chinese market badly enough to build censorship tools. Some of these tools could have handed the Chinese government access to user data, including data on users in Hong Kong. Congress reportedly heard testimony that downplayed how far this effort had gone, even as internal documents told a different story. There are also claims of a foreign leader being asked to help name an unborn child. It sounds too strange to be strategy, except that it was exactly that. The censorship tools never got deployed in China. But the willingness to build them at all says something about how choices got made at the top. Growth first, ethics only if growth demanded it. So if one person at the top made these calls, what actually happened inside his head when the consequences stopped being hypothetical and became real people? Courting an authoritarian government for market access is not a slip. It is a business plan. When insulation becomes a governing style, Facebook had reportedly placed staff inside the Trump campaign to help run its targeting and misinformation operations during the 2016 election. When the outcome landed and reporters asked what role the platform played, the reaction from the top was not alarm. It read closer to indifference. That reaction became a pattern, not a one-time lapse. This is the moment the earlier pieces click together. It is not that leaders made bad calls under pressure. Pressure never reached them at all. Private jets, security details, and total control over the decision chain meant speaking up felt risky, and reporting felt pointless. When you are that shielded, responsibility stops being a duty. It becomes a choice, and the choice is almost always no. This same pattern shows up in Myanmar, where the platform had only 2 Burmese language moderators, both sitting in Dublin, while hate speech against the Rohingya minority spread during what the United Nations later called a genocide. Colleagues raised the alarm for years before the violence peaked. Leadership did not act, not because they lacked the facts, but because acting would have slowed growth in a market they were not prioritizing. The insulation was not an accident of scale. It was maintained on purpose because it let everyone at the top keep believing they were not the ones responsible. The autocracy at the top was never really about ego. It was about building a life where consequences could not physically reach you. Think about the last time you watched a leader avoid a hard truth. Did the system protect them from that truth, or did they simply choose not to look? If the first half of this summary shifted how you see power at the top, someone in your life is probably still defending the myth of the well-meaning tech founder. Pass this along. Speak up before you are sure. The most useful, practical lesson here is not subtle. Raise the alarm early in writing, even before you know how bad things will get. Colleagues warned Facebook leadership about Myanmar for years before the violence spread, and those warnings went nowhere at the time. But they existed. They became a paper trail that mattered later, both for holding people accountable and for the people who wrote them. Most employees wait until they feel certain before they speak up. A half-formed warning feels unprofessional, so they sit on it. That instinct gets the order backwards. Certainty almost never arrives before it is too late. A specific, dated, written warning beats a perfect argument delivered after the damage is done, every time. If you spot a risk forming at work today, write it down and send it, even if you are only 60% sure. Waiting for certainty is how good people become quiet accomplices. The lean-in trap. Sheryl Sandberg built her public brand on female empowerment through her book, Lean In. She told women to advocate for themselves and take up space. Inside the building, the picture flips. Female staff were reportedly expected to give unpaid labor supporting that book and brand. Meanwhile, maternity support on the ground left one pregnant employee working through a medical crisis with almost no institutional backup. Here is the mistake most people make about speaking up inside a toxic system. They assume the culture rewards the behavior it publicly praises. It does not. The public message and the private incentive pointed in opposite directions, and that gap was not an accident. It was where the real power actually lived. Advocating for yourself only works if the system above you is not quietly working against the advice it sells you. A company can sell empowerment as a product while running exploitation as its actual operating system. That gap between what a culture says and what it rewards is not just a gender problem. It runs through everything. Culture is not a vibe, it is an incentive system. New hires got handed a booklet of stated values, the same kind of document that opened this story. That was never the real culture. The real culture was a live incentive system that told people, moment to moment, what was safe to say and what got punished. Speaking up got treated as disloyalty. Staying quiet got rewarded with access. Private jets, dinners with heads of state, the kind of proximity that makes you feel too important to keep asking hard questions. That access is the trap. Glamour did not make leadership less petty or more accountable. It made challenging them feel almost unthinkable, because who questions someone who just had dinner with a president? If an incentive system this strong can quietly override stated values inside one office, what happens when a handful of platforms built the same way end up shaping political discourse for billions of people? If this picture of workplace power and glamour got under your skin, share it with someone who has ever confused access to power with being held accountable to people. The cost nobody was watching for. Teenagers scrolling late at night were reportedly flagged as vulnerable the moment they felt worthless, insecure, or like a failure. Internal materials described targeting 13 to 17-year-olds during exactly those emotional states, including moments tied to body image and weight. Executives making these calls sent their own kids to schools with strict screen bans and filled their homes with wooden toys instead of tablets. They understood the damage. They built it anyway and sold it to other people's children. That contradiction is the whole book compressed into one image. The people closest to the machine trusted at least with their own families, while pointing it at the most fragile moments of everyone else's. This is the same insulation from the fourth key idea, just aimed downward this time, at users instead of at the public. Unchecked power does not usually announce itself as evil. It just quietly stops asking who gets hurt, one growth metric at a time. The bigger question this leaves standing. Once a handful of platforms this size hold this much reach, is there any accountability strong enough to catch up with them, or only warnings that arrive after the fact, filed away for a memoir someone writes years later? If executives shield their own kids from a product they sell to yours, that is not a policy gap. That is a confession. If this final piece connected the whole picture for you, this is the moment to send the complete summary to someone who still trusts the glamour more than the evidence. Implementation Guide. Write down one risk you see forming at your own workplace today, even if you are not fully sure it will happen. Check whether your organization's stated values actually match what gets rewarded in meetings and promotions, and name one gap you notice this week. If you manage people, spend 10 minutes asking whether your team feels safe raising concerns directly to you, or whether they only tell you after it is too late. Before you accept your next perk at work, a good meeting or a flattering invite, ask whether it makes you more likely to challenge a bad call or less likely. Careless People shows how these small, ordinary habits compound into something enormous, so treat each of these 5-minute checks as a habit, not a one-time exercise. Review and criticism. The account leans entirely on one person's memory and motive, rather than court records or outside verification, so readers hoping for a neutral policy analysis will come away wanting more balance. The middle chapters also slow down on personal anecdotes before the sharpest material arrives late in the book. We rate it 4.4 out of 5. Final summary. This summary of Careless people starts by tearing down the myth of the harmless startup and ends with teenagers targeted at their most fragile moments. Between those 2 points runs one thread: insulation from consequences, whether through one man's total control, a market obsession with China, or the pull of private jets, turns carelessness into a way of running a company rather than an occasional mistake. The lessons about speaking up early and watching the gap between stated values and real incentives apply just as much in your own office as they did inside Facebook's headquarters. Which of these 8 ideas will you put into practice this week? The full book covers ground this summary had to skip, including a surreal Settlers of Catan game played aboard a private jet that reveals who really controls the board, the exact chain of events that led to the author's firing, and the legal fight Meta waged trying to stop the book from reaching readers at all. Anyone who manages people, works inside a large company, or simply scrolls social media daily will find something here that reframes what they thought they knew. For more on Sarah Wynn-Williams and the full picture this summary of Careless people only sketched, check out the StoryShots app.